democracy without equality and representation. So knowing about gender representation is incredibly important. You can't call yourself a democracy without it. Plus, it's also good for us to self-reflect about our own place and where we are. And we're not even going to guess where we are. But you should think about it. Maybe ask Lucia and Akia afterwards. All right, so next, let's switch gears again a little bit. And now go to a segment we're called Your Issues in Words. Please welcome Naomie and Josh. Come on up. Hello, hello. How are we?
Good.
Doing all right.
Doing all right. Excellent, excellent. So your part was a bit different in this podcast, right? What was your job for the podcast?
So basically, Basically, Josh and I were in charge of collecting basically all our classmates' answers. They had to answer a 2-question survey, and those 2 questions were what the 2 current global issues are most important to them right now, and also why. And so Josh and I are here to talk about what the answers are.
So the 2 of you asked our class, we have 22 students in our class that are putting on this show, and they asked everyone for their 2 most important issues. And it was anonymous, and everyone just wrote their 2 issues,
right.
So collectively, 48 possible issues.
There you go.
And what did you find?
So we found that we had quite a variety of issues that the students decided to put onto the list of what they thought was important for the world. We actually have a lot of them right here, so I'm going to quickly list out all the ones that were listed by the students here.
How many?
We have, I believe
I think it was 37.
37?
I think so.
There were 37 votes in total that we counted.
We're naming them quick, and then we'll go into the nitty-gritty.
Gotcha. All right, take it away.
All right, so we have women, so there's women's rights around the world and politics. Russia-Ukraine war, we have military coups in Africa specifically. We have the climate crisis, we have gun rights and gun control. We have worldwide democratic backsliding, access to education, global classism, civil wars in Africa, political parties, the dominant ones in politics, economic inequality, Taiwan safety and independence, Palestine, Western imperialism, stability of international trade, the One Belt Road Initiative, the U.S. government shutdown, the refugee crisis, globalization, AI voices, global equality, and homelessness.
You did good.
Class, you just made my night. You actually care about that much stuff? Oh, there is hope. There is hope. Yes, thank you. All right, keep going for us. What you got for us next?
All right, so we've narrowed it down to a top 6. So I'm gonna name the three who had the most votes. The 3 issues who had the
Okay, so the issues with the most votes in the class.
Exactly, the 3 first. So the first one is women. Generally speaking, people seem to be concerned about women in politics, concerned about their rights, their representation, and gender inequalities in general. We also had the Russia-Ukraine war, and basically Russia's invasion of the sovereign state of Ukraine. And the third one was African internal conflicts, and out of that it was basically the military coups and the civil wars that are still ongoing.
After that, the next 3 issues that we found most important from the students. So we have the global climate crisis. So that, of course, is the changing climate conditions that are caused by the human interaction with the environment, so carbon emissions, microplastics in water, things of that nature. Then we have gun violence. So a main theme that we found among the students, the way they described it, is that too many people around the world are dying from violence with guns. And that can be a hard issue for a lot of people to talk about, so it's nice that the class was able to put it in on there. And then the 6th issue that we found the most important, democratic backsliding. So that would mean that there are a lot of nations in the world who are becoming less democratic than they were before. Maybe they weren't very high on the scale for democracy, maybe they were somewhere on the midway, but somewhere along the way they lost some of their democracy.
Excellent, excellent. So that's top 6. What are your top 2? What 2 issues did our class care the most about?
Okay, so the first one is women, so we thought it would be smarter if I would talk about it. So there is a general concern for women's bodily autonomy, their representation, particularly in politics, and for the state of their rights, which seems to be declining in many of the countries right now, which is concerning. And women's rights have been suppressed for decades, which is why I think it's such an important issue to our generation. So much so that some of those gender-based inequalities are still embedded into societies and governments all across. And we just think that our generation values that and wants to change that.
Excellent, excellent.
As for our second issue, the second most popular one was the Russia-Ukraine war that's going on. So the Russia-Ukraine conflict, as many people know, over a year ago, Russia decided to invade Ukraine for reasons of its own. What those reasons are is anyone's guess to some extent. This conflict is still going on to this day. There is still violence being done. And I mean, that's a very important issue, especially to the world today, because any violence is bad violence. We don't want people dying, we don't want people being hurt, which is a reason why it was talked about in a lot of the responses that we got. So it's still affecting those innocent people. It's a danger to a lot of places around the world because a conflict of this nature has global impacts, like for every country ever, because if a nation can invade another nation and successfully do it, and while Ukraine, of course, is getting support, it's not getting as much support as Ukraine would even hope. What does that mean for other nations that might have something like this happen? What does this mean for the nations that are supposed to help and are not? And then, of course, we have the fear of a spread of authoritarianism. With Russia invading Ukraine, Vladimir Putin is the president. One of the responses that was put down by the students is the fear of the spread of authoritarianism, as a president could do something like this. There's also a large arsenal for this massive country that's invading another one, which is a big threat. And then there's just a possible escalation in general. If this war continues on, another thing the students put down is they're afraid of what's going to happen, of what other countries might join. And yeah, that's what we got for the Russia-Ukraine. That's what our class decided to say. A lot of good stuff.
Yep.
I love it, I love it. Thank you so much. And you know, Naomie and Josh, and part of the reason why I got you to do this job is because it's also often we hear in politics, and especially in political science classes, we teach about all the pressing issues of the day. But those are like our pressing issues, right? Or they're the pressing issues that media put out. They're the pressing issues that politicians put out. They're not necessarily your pressing issues. And I think it's important for all of you to be able to speak about what's important to you. But I think the next step is obviously, what are you going to do about it? Because I see some really important issues that you have that you want to change, and the time to change them is now. Because war and gender inequality have been around for a very long time. The problem I found with my generation is they took the idea of, you know what, we're going to change it when we get to power. Guess what happened when they got to power? Nothing. They took on someone else's issues. So I'm a political scientist, not a political activist. I very rarely tell my students how to change positive or make positive changes in the world. But I will give you a hint. If you want to change the world for the better today, then you have to start today. Don't wait until you're old enough to be elected a representative or a senator or a president or a prime minister. The time for you to change gender inequality is today. The time for you to act out against violence is today. So start on it right now, please, because my generation failed, and I'm putting all my marbles on you. So please save me. I know that sounds like a little like selfish, but you know, you can save me and everyone else at the same time. But thank you very much again, Josh and Naomie, and everyone who took part in that, because it is no small task to write the two most important issues to you in the world on a piece of paper and hand it up, and you know, you're thinking, well, what is my professor going to do with this? But that's also why we made it anonymous. But our next segment, we are getting into the Q&A section, and that will be led by Jaylin and Chasity. Please come on up, and people, put your hands together. Jaylin and Chasity. Hello, hello. How are we doing today?
We're good.
Yes, yes, yes.
Life is good.
Life is good. Life is good.
How are
so,
you?
how do we want to run Q&A today?
First, we want to start off and see if anybody in the audience has any questions. If not, then we'll kind of do a what does the audience know about current democracy type of thing. So anybody have any specific questions they want to ask us about our class, what we're learning, or Dr. Pickering at all? So
this is the Q part of Q&A. We need the questions. Does anyone have any questions about the world in general? Because the three of us have all the answers, if you didn't know. Although we do have help for political science. It's that actually quite a few doctors from different fields are in the house, so we have some areas of expertise in here. Yes?
Whatever became of the Kenyan intervention
The Kenyan intervention into Haiti. The two of you want to take this one, or do you want me to?
You would definitely know a lot more about it than
I would
me.
say I'd give you the opportunity. Okay, so right now it is to the points where Kenya has agreed with the United Nations to lead the international forces. However, opposition parties in Kenya are telling the Kenyan government that they actually have to get approval by the Kenyan parliament in order to use Kenyan forces in another country. So in other words, in order for Haiti to receive help, now it's not just the UN has to okay it, now the Kenyan government has to go before Parliament, and Parliament has to pass it in Kenya for it to take place. So that's like the next thing that we're watching as far as Kenya going to Haiti. It could be quite a while, months if not till next year, till we see actual intervention.
What class are you in?
We're currently in comparative democratization.
Oh, you gave me a scare for a second. I was so happy you knew the answer to that. I was like, please know what class we're in.
Comparative democratization.
Yes. Comparative democratization is the name of our class, hence the title, Democracy Unplugged.
Any other questions, guys? You? He's a long question.
So, the Security Council was supposed to enforce, the law for like countries that do wrong. So with Russia invading Ukraine, you see what that outlook of other countries doing the same thing.
Okay, so the question is, in a more general way, the United Nations is supposed to protect international law, and theoretically, Russia broke international law by invading Ukraine. And your question seems to be, if the UN doesn't do it, doesn't stop a country like Russia from breaking international law, will other countries start to break international law as well? For example, will China invade Taiwan? Different things like that. So, okay, I got you. What do we think about this? If the UN doesn't stop people from breaking international law, who will?
I definitely think it is possible, just because countries that typically, and even people who have a lot of power, if they feel like they can take it from people that don't have as much, you start to get greedy. So it's kind of like an ongoing thing. It's a domino effect, which is why I think it's really important that the UN actually get its own, I don't want to say enforcement team, but like an army, because they have nobody. And I think that's part of the reason why they don't necessarily try to stop bigger countries, because they would have to involve other countries in their army systems in order to enforce things like that on such a big, powerful country like Russia. So yeah, I do think that it definitely would lead into a domino effect.
I'm not sure if it would lead to a domino effect. I think it's a good thing that we don't have one world power. I think that, like, our policies about the border and, like, you know, feeling like one country, like, if you're born in one country, you should, like, stay within that country. I don't know. I just feel like if we start getting, like, a world power, like one world government, then we might, like, turn into something that the world is not ready for. But I think the Russia-Ukraine thing is a very unique situation, because Russia's actually isn't Russia part of the UN? They're on the Security Council. I don't think the UN would be the best mechanism to try to deter Russia. Are there, Jamari? Jamari, do you have anything to say?
Russia may be a member of the Security Council, but I also know that they're being kicked out of other, what's it called?
The Human Rights Council, they were kicked out of it.
Yeah, other sections.
So one of the big things about the United Nations working to stop countries or people from breaking international law is that the United Nations, and I say this not trying to make fun of the United Nations, but making sure everyone realizes the truth. The United Nations is a social club for countries. It's an organization, it's an intergovernmental organization, an international organization, but it's not an actual government. And that's why for a lot of us who teach international politics, or people who talk about becoming international lawyers and talk about international law, well, what is international law varies around the world, and what courts can protect us from people breaking it varies to a large degree as well. So it's a very difficult question, and so I think in many ways everyone is correct, because it's all about what we choose to do to stop each other from doing things. And that just leaves a whole bunch of question marks and scariness.
Right. Dr. Ranke, you have a question?
Since you studied democracy in a comparative perspective, do you now think that the U.S. is a strong democracy or a weak democracy?
The question is, so that way everyone can hear, since they have studied comparative democratization and democracies around the world, do they think the United States is a strong democracy or not?
I think it's very weak.
Ooh.
Conclusively.
Dr.
I
Ranke
think
was
it's
trying to give us
weak.
hope, but now Jaylin is like, nope.
I think it's weak. Part of our class, something that we are working on is an analytical essay of comparing a free country. I don't know if you guys have heard of Freedom House before. It's a website that compares political rights as well as civil rights, and it'll rank a country on a scale from 1 to 100 based on how many political or civil rights it has and it provides for its people. I cannot remember the exact number the United States is.
I do.
84? Okay, so the country
I thought it
that
was in 83. Did we go up a point? I don't know.
Did we?
I checked it like a couple of weeks ago.
All right, we'll say 84, with the asterisk that maybe it should be an 83. Who knows?
We have several European countries that are at an 100, a 96, higher than 84. So, I mean, and they focus pretty much on how we were worried about women's rights. Bodily autonomy is very important in Europe and countries over there. So, compared to other countries, it's kind of weak, guys.
Chastity, what do you think?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think there are a slew of reasons, just starting with the racial ones and the gender disparities that we see in this country. But I just remember a specific moment in your class where you were saying that if not everyone can participate in an election, then do you have a democracy? The answer is no. If you cannot go to the polls, if you are not being included, you are not actually a democratic country. You're not including all voices when you're making decisions. And that's what a true democracy is. So I don't see that for poor people in this country. I don't see that for the different marginalized groups. There are so many barriers when it comes to just voting, and voting is not even the crux of what truly makes a country democratic. So I would say no. Do we enjoy? Oh.
Well said, well said.
Okay. We have one more minute, guys. So Jamari.
About the military coups in Africa, do you think that other neighboring African countries who are authoritarian in some way could follow the same path as that other African countries have, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso?
So the question is, there's been a lot of military coups in Central and Western Africa in the past several years. And Jamari wants to know, do we think that this is a trend, and will we continue to see this happen more and more?
Military coups, I definitely am not sure. I guess it's just, like I said, it's subjective for everybody. Authoritarianism, it can spread, but it's not spreading as quickly as I think a lot of us feared. We learned about Ghana in class this week, and that definitely gives me a lot of hope. It took a couple of years for the places surrounding Ghana to follow in its path towards democratization and moved a whole lot slower, but it did follow. So just like good things spread, bad things can spread too. So I guess it just depends on the will of the people.
Chastity, closing thoughts?
I think the military coups are a lot more complicated, and especially when you look at it from the perspective of the people within those countries. You were talking about the research paper that we're working on. One of the countries that I assigned myself is Niger, which is going through a lot of military coups right now. And when you scroll on TikTok, on Twitter, social media, whatever, and you try to find people speaking about these military coups, these military actions, and you get the perspective from an actual person that's there, you kind of understand that global white supremacy has kind of skewed the way we see things as American. Like, we might just see it as a military coup, but in reality, maybe this is one step in a big movement of liberalization, and it just might not look peaceful, but I don't know, I'm just saying it's more complicated than it seems, and I just feel like as an American who can only see things in English, like I can only understand things in English, like I just feel like we kind of don't always get the full perspective of an issue, and we don't always get the perspective of those that are going through that very real thing. We're just kind of on the outside making assumptions about what's going on and whether it's right or wrong, and I think it's just so important to like go out of your way to try to understand people, like even though like you know, a country going through a military coup is obviously like there's a lot of violence going on, but I think that just trying to understand instead of like, I don't know, just call it a coup, like
Americanizing it, because it's very easy to be distant from something that's not happening or affecting you directly. So
That's absolutely right. And plus, you say military coup and you think, oh, that's horrible, they're overthrowing the government. But do you say that knowing what the previous government was? What if the previous government was a horrible dictatorship? No, so when we start to think about trends of military coups, we should also be thinking about what were the countries like before these coups happened. Because remember, there was a revolution in a country that we're standing in once upon a time because we didn't like the government because we called it bad and we wanted to make something better. So you're absolutely right. We should educate ourselves about the countries before we pass judgment. Without a doubt, without a doubt. Well, people, put your hands together for our Q&A specialist. Thank you so much.
It was 83.
83?
I just want to make sure.
So the United States has an 83, okay? So
I just
it's,
want to make sure that I was wrong.
okay. Well, how do we bring this to a close? First off, thank you for everyone for coming. Let me throw some quick shout outs for our organizations, because after we are finished with the live podcast, we're going to move into the side corridor there. We have snacks there, but we also have different UNO organizations that are present for you to mingle with, talk to. It's a meet and greet, people. Yes, talk to each other. It's an amazing thing. Put your phones down for a moment. But we have UNO's Pre-Law Association. We have UNO's Political Science Honor Society, Pi Sigma Alpha. We have UNO Model United Nations, UNO at the Beach, Keep Louisiana Beautiful UNO, UNO Center for Undergraduate Research and Creativity, and UNO Student Government. And my people, these organizations came here tonight to talk to you. So grab some food, mingle, and talk to them. And if you're unsure what they are about, well, why do you think they're here? To tell you what they are about. So definitely mingle with everyone and talk to everyone. But I think the biggest thing we should close out with, especially talking about Democracy Unplugged, and why I love what we have done this time. This is the third year I've done a live podcast, but it's the first time I've ever done it with my class and with my students coming up. And we do have a second one in 1 month from today, November 9th. My other class is going to be doing that one. But it was a little scary for me to have my students come up and talk, because normally in the podcast it's just me. It's rare. I try to get guests on, but it's quite difficult. But here tonight you got to hear from yourselves, and I think that's a big part of what democracy is about. Democracy is about hearing more than just what I think is important in the world. It's talking about what's important in the world to you. So for all of you that participated, whether it was behind the scenes or on stage, please stand up. If you participated putting on the show, my students, yes, come on, stand up. Put your hands together. These are all the people. Thank you so much, all of you, yes. And again, the night does not end because the podcast is over. Please meet and greet and talk to everyone. We have a little saying we always like to end on. Lofi Poli Sci is more than just me. It's the we that we be. And this is what we look like, all right? So put your hands together for yourself. Have a wonderful evening, and I will talk to all of you very, very soon.